Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another session with InfoSec Girls. So, today we have our speaker Neha Dhyani. Neha is a seasoned cybersecurity professional with 14 years of experience in the information security domain. She is presently working with VMware Carbon Black as senior security consultant and manages the pre-sales for India North region. Neha defines herself as a passionate and continuous learner into this exciting cyber world. We are so excited to have you, Neha. Over to you.
Thank you, Gunjan, so much, and a very warm welcome to all our viewers. My name is Neha Dhyani, and today's topic for session is cyber threat hunting. Now, a brief background on about myself. So, I am a senior security consultant at VMware Carbon Black. I am InfoSec Girls chapter lead for Delhi location as well, and I define myself as a passionate learner. And for the people who really want to learn, they can follow me on Twitter and have a quick look on my LinkedIn profile as well. Now, the agenda for today's discussion will be to definitely look towards, what are the key challenges when it comes to security landscape, define what is threat hunting, what exactly that it means, and what are the effective ways to look into the threat hunting. Why do we need that? Why organizations need that? And then why there is an integration, must to have integration with the Maitre attack framework. And then we'll open the sessions for Q&A. Now, before we deep dive into cyber threat hunting, I think it is very important to understand in today's world what is cyber threat. As we all know, cyber threat is actually, I would say, an individual or a group who develops specific TTPs, tactic techniques, and procedures which can be used to compromise your organization network. And the goal can be anything, can be to disrupt the business or to steal the valuable information which is there in your organization. Now, as we all understand, security breaches have multiple serious implications, starting from disrupted business operation, bad publicity, losing customers, financial losses. Now, if you look at, one of the very recent SAN survey, it talks about that approximately 82% of the organization have recently said that they anticipate the loss or the theft of data, resulting from an unsecured internet connected devices or an application. Now, this is really important to understand that, how many organizations are claiming that, they anticipate this theft of data. Now, by preparing for an inevitable breach, rather than expecting it, it will be better to be prevented so that, the enterprise or the organization can deliver a better security posture, and then they can set the foundation for their teams to proactively hunt for threats. So idea is that, while we are looking into more and more reactive approach, the foundation behind cyber threat hunting is to become more and more proactive, because it is taking close to 68% of the data breach are taking more than months and longer to discover. So idea is that, how can we reduce this dwell time of rather than being months and weeks to minutes in today's world. Now, in today's context, I think it is very relevant to understand that, nowadays, one of the major threat the organizations are facing is towards the non-malware attacks. The non-malware attacks are on the rise, vis-a-vis, the attacks that makes use of the known malware. If you look at, one of the recent SAN survey, it talks about that, 77% of the organization data says that, endpoint data was critical, for conducting proactive threat hunts. And we really need to have security tools like EDR, next generation AV, that can continuously collect all this information, which is required for effective threat hunting. And that's going to be the base or a foundation for today's discussion. And these are some of the figures, that I'm going to talk about, that, when it comes to, looking into the attack dwell time, this is typically coming out to be on an average of 78 days. And looking at, the number of security products, it's huge. Organizations are spending too much, when it comes to deployment of endpoint security products. Similarly, if you look at, the cost of the data breach, what is an effective impact when there is a data breach? It is huge. We are talking about $3.92 million. And this is something which gonna cost customer too much. So attackers are actually exploiting weakness in perimeters and moving to sensitive assets over time. And this is something which we're going to look at. Now, what exactly is threat hunting? before we look into, we really need to understand what is missing right now. The question is, what you cannot secure, that you do not understand. And the answer for that is, before you look into, you have to have a proactive security approach for security. That means that before you deep dive into threat hunting, you really need to have a mindset to get into a proactive security approach, rather than looking into the threats or the alerts which are happening in a reactive way. We really need to devise a framework, a methodology, a workflow, you can name it whichever way. But we really need to have a proactive approach to define this practice called threat hunting. Now, looking into that, what we really need in today's environment, we really need to have context from both the sides, a threat based context as well as the application or infrastructure based context. It is not something that we are just looking at the threats, how it happened, where it happened. Rather, we really need to have the application context, what is the business relevant that the threat context is talking about here. Now let's define that, when it comes to cyber threat hunting, what exactly is it? So, if in simple terms, if I really need to define it, I would say that cyber threat hunting is simply a pursuit of abnormal activity, that could be happening over your critical workloads, over your critical endpoints, and that may be a sign of compromise, intrusion, or exfiltration of data. So it really combines, proactive methodology, innovative technology, and threat intelligence to find and stop these malicious activity. And how do we get started? If I really say that, how do we get started? To actually do this effectively, you need to have, tools like, innovative technology, tools like EDR, endpoint detection and response, that really gives you a granular visibility in terms of, what is happening across your endpoints or across your critical workloads. Because the tools like EDR captures all the process activity which is happening over the endpoints. So when it comes to cyber threat hunting, it actually often starts from, it is, I would say, hypothesis based. We really need to know when to threat hunt. Now, when I say we really need to know, we really need to see that, how exactly we can start the threat hunt. Now, threat hunting can be based on new research. So when I say new research, it can be, looking for specific vulnerabilities. It can be based on a new breach. So, discussion on, I would say, new attack vectors which are happening nowadays, and then looking for even, as small as, an odd activity. So while you see, there is some abnormal activity which is going in your network, now this can also be a base, to start your threat hunting exercise. Now, looking at the key elements, what are the key elements behind the threat hunting? So one of the key element is, you need to have a methodology, you need to have a tools or technology in place, you need to have a highly skilled personnel to understand that, what they are looking, a really skilled personnel who really understand these threats from the malware, non-malware perspective, and then definitely, the threat intelligence platform. Now, when we say that, how do we actually get started, how do we actually, execute our threats? So if you see, before you start hunting the threats, it can start with a hypothesis. You think of that, while there are multiple processes, which are happening across the endpoints, you start your hunt by looking at, a malicious or a suspicious PowerShell script. As we all know, PowerShell is one of the legitimate application which is kind of all allowed within the organization. Now we start that, looking into an organization, that, how many users are using PowerShell, and, how many of them are kind of, making use of suspicious PowerShell scripts within the organization. Now, when this hunt gets started, we need to see and repeat, until we make sure that, all suspicious activities are taken out. That means you look into the use of PowerShell, and then you filter out that, okay, this is the legitimate activity. Then again you go back to the search, and then again you filter out. So what we are doing eventually is we are removing all the false positives. Now, once we have the suspicious activity, the next step is, of course, to do a root cause analysis. That means that what occurred on the device, what did the user do, looking for this new piece of information, some IP address used, which is being used to exfiltrate the data, registry key being added for persistence. All of these items, become additional indicators that you can search to fully understand the scope of an incident that has happened. And then after the root cause analysis, the next step is definitely to response, and remediate. And this could actually include, removing the malicious activity, like, correcting and repairing the system files, settings. Even, you can think of re-imaging your systems or any other means to remove all the traces of attack. Now, the response and remediation can vary from organization to organization. And the next step, of course, is to have a continuous improvement. That means there is a feedback into the loop, which actually makes sure that, you are continuously hardening your defenses. Okay. And while we do so, we really need to have some sort of, automated way of doing that. Now, one automated of doing that is, make use of some sort of a watch list. Now, what is this watch list, if you may ask? Watch list could be some kind of, I would say, safe searches which are, automating your detection, looking for the cyber behaviors. And then there is no reason why we are doing so, because there is no reason that, your team is spending so much time to hunt for the same threat twice, thrice. Rather, what we need is, the automated detections, to make sure that, we are not hunting those threats twice. And rather, we should build out integrations for faster responses on automated action towards our endpoints. Now, when I talk about, continuous improvement, now if you feel that, there is a known vulnerability that was exploited, one of the continuous improvement can be that, we need to go ahead and patch it. Okay. If a end user started, this incident by clicking a phishing email, okay, then another continuous improvement could be that, you perform a refresher training for the whole organization or those set of users. All of these will actually help you to improve your defenses across your organization. So as you see, these are a couple of steps which really you need to understand to decide that, how you can execute your threat hunt. Now, let us start with a scenario, how exactly this will happen in a real life scenario. Now, let's take a scenario, and I'm kind of, creating this scenario on a random way that, imagine that there is a user, who calls into a help desk to report that, he or she has kind of, opened the email attachment from the Outlook. And now the computer has all of a sudden started behaving in a strange way. Okay. And they are worried that, something malicious has happened, but again, they are not sure what could be the reason. Now, before we start and, start our threat hunting exercise, we really need to see and understand the complete process analysis. While we have some inputs that, there are some process like Outlook which were opened, we really have informations that, this has happened from a user account. We really know the users, we really know their accounts. So we have some information. And now what we really need to look into the process hierarchy. That means, what was the parent process? What was the child process? Which process invoked which another process, and what were the outcomes for that? Now let's try to see it from a brief example. So as you can see above that, Outlook was one of the process as per our scenario that, kind of opened, Outlook opened an attachment which has got an Excel. Now this Excel has got a macro, and the moment you enable the macro, there's a partial, script that gets executed. Now, as you see, while this has happened, this actually makes us a little more curious that, what has happened, what scenarios are happening here. The moment you click on partial, again, you are taken into a deep dive view where you can see that the partial actually invoked a command line script and then some of the other process. And this is something, which is really important to understand that, what partial is doing here. Now partial is trying to execute a command line script which could be a batch file. Okay. And this batch file is trying to, is trying to run some scripts behind. Now what we need at this point of time is that, ability to understand that, what are these encoded scripts, which are running within this particular partial. Once I have that ability, I'll be able to make sure that, what are the actions being taken in the backend. Are they launching some sort of keys, which are trying to build persistence within the systems? So clearly at each point of time, as you can see, I need to drill down, look into the alert triage, look into each of these process and understand what are they trying to do within my system. Are they trying to do file modification? Are they trying to do some registry modifications? What are the impact of each of these process across my environment? And this is really important as part of a threat hunting exercise. And this becomes really much and much easier when you have tools like EDR, endpoint detection and response, which gives you unfiltered visibility and a complete process tree kind of a view where you can actually go back in time, move forward in time, and see, what is the impact of a particular alert that you are looking across your system. So this is where, you have a complete visibility in the form of a process tree. Now, once you have a clear visibility that what is happening within your environment, the next step, of course, is to perform the remediation. So when I say remediation, that means we have clearly figured it out that there is a malicious activity which is going on as part of this scenario. The next step, of course, is to isolate the endpoint and then look into that how can I perform incident investigation and do the necessary forensics. And as part of necessary forensics, then the next step what you can do is you can go live. That means that you take a secure remote shell of that infected host, wherein you can actually kill the malicious process, do the memory dumps, and upload more forensics tool, make sure the machine is clean, and then bring back to the network. So these are some of the basics that while you are closing the loop when you have done your threat hunting, these are some of the response and the remediation steps which can be taken as the next steps. Now we really need to understand that though we understand that each and every threat hunt will require some sort of tactics, techniques, and procedures that the attackers are using, but we really need to see what is a common language that I really need to look into or look up to when I need to understand this. Is there actually some sort of a security language that the industry understand, which is a benchmark for entire industry, which is kind of enabling the standardized frameworks for evaluating the security controls, or it can be used for doing a gap assessment across the security controls? So answer is yes. There is definitely a framework that exists today, and that framework is MITRE ATT&CK. As we all know, MITRE ATT&CK is a globally accessible knowledge base of adversaries, TTPs, and which is kind of based on real world scenarios. And if you ask me, industry nowadays speaks about MITRE. It is highly used and kind of integrated, well integrated across the multiple platforms, including your different endpoint security protection platforms like EDR and many others. And it can be used to emulate the adversaries to validate the controls. It is definitely being used to do a gap analysis. And this is kind of, globally accessible and continuously getting updated based on new and new techniques which are being exploited by the adversaries. Now, if you look at, from a MITRE perspective, MITRE defines the entire metrics into two parts, tactics and techniques. There are multiple tactics and techniques which are being used by MITRE. And as we know, tactic, I would say, is the outcome of, what the attacker wants, what he's looking to achieve when they are kind of, launching an attack. Attacker tactic might be to collect a personal or identifiable information. A tactic, I would say, tactics and techniques, you can imagine it in the form of a nuts and bolt of an attack framework. If I have to give you an example of a tactic, example of tactic you can be, I would say, a lateral movement. Now, in order for an attacker to successfully achieve lateral movement, okay, in a network, they will have to employ one or more technique which could be listed in a lateral movement column of the attack metrics. Okay, now if I look at technique, again, there are multiple techniques, close to 478 techniques and sub techniques that exist in the MITRE framework as of now. And this technique, I would say, is a specific behavior to achieve a goal and is often a single step in a string of activities, to complete the attacker overall mission. If you ask me, attack framework today provides details about each techniques, including a description, example, references, even suggestions for mitigation and detection. If you want some more details, you can visit at attack.mitre.org for more details, and it is a complete deep dive well of information. Here are some of them for your quick references. As you can see, I have listed out a couple of tactics for your quick references. One of them could be initial access, lateral movement, collections, impact. So these are some of the tactics which are being listed by over the MITRE's website. And if you look into each one of these, each one of these tactics have got a specific TID, which kind of mapped to these tactics. And what if you look at all the industry tools, they have actually mapped their TTPs with respect to these TIDs of the MITRE attack framework. That is where, looking at which you can quickly understand what attackers are trying to do within your environment, which actions of, which tactic techniques are mapped with respect to which DIDs of the Maitri attack framework. Now, what exactly it really helps, integrating Maitri attack framework into threat hunting is something which is really important. Why so? Because, if you look at pyramid of pain, it talks about that, while for an attacker, changing a IP, URL, domain, hash is something which is as easy as it can be. However, changing a TTP is something which is very hard for them. And that's where Maitri helps. Now, while you integrate your um, um, threat hunting program into the Maitri attack framework, it really helps you. It really increases the efficacy of your threat hunting program, which would mean that, you can hunt for adversary tactics techniques across the Maitri attack metrics. Now, while I say that, we really need to understand that Maitri attack has actually evolved to include the best practices when it comes to detection as well as threat hunting. It really helps in assessment, your threat intelligence. It also does, the adversaries emulation. One of the, I would say, one of the best use of attack framework is to use it to understand how durable, your defenses are for each attack framework. Now, keeping in mind, that you are developing your threat hunting, we really need to know that, the threat hunting process, has to be as iterative as it can be, and there is no end point to it be, because it continuously needs to evolve and it continuously need to improve. We really need to stay focused on steps to help and improve, the speed, accuracy and clarity. And this is something, which will bring your defenses to a higher level of protection against the ever evolving behavior of cyber attacks. Now, when talk about, I think this is something which kind of brings me to one of the last slide, which talks about that, we really need to build a proactive cyber threat hunting platform. And that's something which is all from my side today. A thank you to all my viewers and a very happy threat hunting to all of you.
Thank you, Neha. That was such a wonderful session. I personally have learned a lot of things. So thanks a lot. This was so insightful. I guess we don't have any questions. So if anybody has any queries or something, you have Neha's handle. You can share your queries there. And yeah, we'll see you later with the next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gunjan.
Thank you, Neha.